Welcome to the TTS Talking Educators podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in educational settings. Hi, my name is Dr. Shaddai Tembo, your host for this week's TTS Talking Educators podcast. I'm a senior lecturer at Bath Spa University, an associate lecturer at the Open University, and an independent writer, speaker and consultant with critical early years. Throughout this series, we'll be discussing a range of topics aimed at supporting Oracy in primary and early years settings, inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. This week, I'm delighted to introduce Adam Marycz as our guest. Welcome to the podcast, Adam. How are you?
Hi, Shaddai. I'm good, thank you. Are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Looking forward to getting into the conversation. But before we do, perhaps you could introduce yourself for our listeners.
Yep, thank you. So I am Adam Marycz. I'm the Early Years Education Consultant here at TTS Resources. Prior to joining TTS last year, I was an early years teacher and manager of nurseries and wraparound provision settings for 14 years, working primarily with children from birth through to 11 in both the education and care side of things, depending as to what the provision was. Also lucky enough to be involved in many different critical conversations and reflections, and participating at different conferences and working with local authorities just to really help, have those conversations, have those discussions, really drive the desire and the need for that professional development and for that understanding of like topics like Oracy, like we've been unpicking in these episodes.
Thanks, Adam. So to round up our fourth and final episode, we're going to be talking really practically about effective Oracy interventions and strategies. Now, Adam, I know you've been working early years for a long time. What are the success stories you've seen where Oracy has worked really well? What are those moments you've seen where a difference has been made to a child's life?
Yeah, I think there's obviously there's many different ways that we can do this, and we think about, we spoke many about the language-rich environment and those opportunities for children to talk, and I think about the many different times that you've provided that, whether it's through a planned opportunity, like, when you say, the children, you're having a circle time or a group time with a group of children and you're talking about their experiences, or they're coming to share their news with you, or they're sharing how they're feeling, or they're talking about, their friends, or, they're talking about what they like about each other, for those positive affirmations, however that might look, that provides that opportunity for them to do that, whether it's through, family photos is a really good way to do that. I think having children, providing them with the ability to talk about their family and to talk about who matters to them and who they care about and why they do and what they like about it, what they might not like about it. You think about talking to them about their setting and what they enjoy and what they don't enjoy, what you can, if you're doing that reflection about what you can improve on and what the children want in their space, what their interests and what their needs are. I think about the opportunity at meal times. I think that's, plays a really important role there, the social aspect of things and just the ability to sit in a group and to have a meaningful conversation and to have an interaction that allows you just to engage in that. Obviously not all children will want to engage in that. Some of them will be more comfortable sitting and spending their meal times, just eating and in their own company. We know that children, and like us as adults, some, prefer the company of others, some prefer our own company. And that, that's absolutely fine. It's about you understanding the needs and the interests of your children and you understanding what, how best to support them and those as an adult and as an educator, providing as much time for me as for one-to-one interactions as possible, to make sure that you spend quality time to interact with the children on a daily basis, even if, that's through a story, that's through you facilitating some scaffolding their learning in a particular area, whether that's you joining their play, whether that's an adult-led potentially activity, depending as to, what the intent of the play opportunity, what the intent of the interaction is. I think the importance that all of those things play. I think, we talked a little bit before about that ability to, potentially record yourself and that ability to hear yourself back. I know, and that ability to listen as well as to speak. I think, those back and forth interactions, obviously, is as much about being part of a group and as much about collaboration, as much as about being able to be used to build relationships and to share ideas and to share thoughts, and to be part of a discussion, ultimately. Otherwise, it's just, you're a one-person monologue. You're just narrating your life. You're not actually part of a discussion and part of a conversation. In order to build relationships, if we're thinking about how we can best support children to, have strong relationships with their peers, to have strong relationships with their family, to have strong relationships with educators, that's a two-way dialogue. That's a two-way interaction. That's you listening to what someone says, and that's you responding to it appropriately. That's not just you, doing a monologue and a narration and then thinking that someone else is just going to pick up on that, and then they respond to you and you walk off. That ability to understand, to converse, and that ability to have those interactions and to build those relationships is so fundamental for our ability to succeed in later life and to form part of society and to have strong relationships and to be able to share how we feel, and that we're a much more emotionally intelligent group now than we potentially were. And I think, certainly from my point of view, I'm much more emotionally intelligent now than I was 15 years ago. And I think that all comes from that interaction. That all comes from that importance of actually sharing, not keeping things internal. And that comes from the ability, your ability to verbalise what you're feeling and what you're thinking, and to attach the vocabulary to that is a part of, you helping to build your Oracy skills. And I think there's so many different ways to do that. I think we think about how we identify that children might need additional support and that children might be struggling in particular areas, and we look at what kind of assessment tools there are out there, and what kind of frameworks there are, and whether and how we, as more experienced educators, help to support the younger educators or the newer educators within early childhood to understand when is the right moment, what is the right opportunity for you to support that child, what would the right strategy be to support that child.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and I'm just thinking about lots of different things as you're talking there. Particularly what you said about the inner voice and the children's monologue, because that in itself is a skill that we need to develop in young children, to be able to think through internally their own actions and what they're doing. It's linked to, of course, their organisational skills, how well they can think critically about certain things. So I'm wondering, how best do we support children to initially be able to develop their internal monologue, which a lot of adults don't have, as the research has shown, to better understand their own thinking before they can then engage in those more dialogic conversations with peers and with other adults?
I think it's about helping them to be confident in themselves, to understand who they are, and to have that sense of self. We hear sense of self a lot, and that asking them, not necessarily asking them the right questions, but posing the right opportunities for them to share how they're feeling, what they're thinking. To, as an educator, as an in-tune educator, to notice if the child is behaving a little bit differently, or looks like they might be struggling a little bit, or looks like they may, are not as, maybe they're not as extrovert as they usually are. Maybe they do seem a little bit more reserved, or maybe you're asking them something and they often say, I don't know, and it's about trying to unpick with that, right, so what does that look like, how does that feel, and providing that context with vocabulary. The more vocabulary you can provide to them within context, hopefully the better it makes them to be able to verbalise or to communicate effectively how they are feeling and what they're struggling with. I think, like you say, the internal monologue is a really interesting thing, because the way that we think and what we do or don't say can be hard to regulate. As an adult, it can be difficult to regulate. I just want to say that, and it is what it is. And children absolutely don't, do struggle with that ability to. You can't just say it. You think of all the examples. I'm sure you've got many over the years of some of the things that children have said, and because I've got a daughter and she's 7, and I dread to think what she shares with the classmates and the teachers, because that she just thinks of what's in her head and it comes out, and it is what So it's like, right, so how can we? They say, how can we support them to do that? How can we support them to do that in a managed way that doesn't feel like it's embarrassing? It doesn't feel like they should be concerned about sharing something. It doesn't feel that they are not able to say that, and that safe space and that idea of belonging and that idea of relationships, and having those strong relationships with children all plays a really big role there. And I think, obviously children have always got thoughts and feelings running around their mind, and that's what's going on all the time. Like us as adults, and like we spoke about distraction before, like you distract and suddenly your train of thought is 4 miles away in someone else. So how can we help them, provide them with the language to do that, and provide them with the context that comes with that? I think, was thinking about communication language the other week, and for me, the context is so important, because otherwise words are meaningless. Without that context and without that ability to use the words to deliver a meaning, this isn't, language falls apart. It doesn't work. I think that's what sets us apart from, the types of humans that were before, is the ability that we can use words and language and pictures and whatever that is to communicate in a way that, no other species can.
That's really interesting. I think it's Yuval Noah Harari who's written a book about that, and what distinguishes us from previous humans and all animals is our ability to think abstractly and hold kind of complex ideas in mind. So I completely agree with that. It feels like it's about adopting a curiosity approach with young children, and making sure that we're extending their language and not making them feel ashamed to perhaps share their thoughts in a really safe environment. I think it was interesting what you were saying about mealtime earlier on, though, because for me, I was reflecting on that and thinking about all of my experiences working in nursery settings and how often that's a real pinch point in the nursery day. You've just got children coming in from outdoors, still quite energetic. They've just finished changing nappies, probably only got half an hour before they have to go to sleep, or parents are being picked up. It's typically more adult-led than child-led. Actually, that could potentially be a really good opportunity to support more conversations around Oracy and embed a kind of practice of slowness. But typically that's not always the case, from certainly what I've seen in my practice. I'm wondering what your sense of mealtimes is, how practitioners can better support slowness during those moments that's often typically quite a busy time of the day.
Yeah, I think it's often the case with many transitions, isn't it? I think about transitions like you've just alluded to at the end of the day, where, I've had many conversations over the years about that, stories. We often see stories at that time used as like a holding time. And then the emphasis and the importance of books isn't necessarily placed on the children, because they just see it as like you say, it's a holding opportunity. Well, we read a story while we wait for my mum to come, or we wait for my dad to come, rather than it actually being a purposeful time that really has an impact. I think like you say, it can be the same with lunchtime, because it's often time pressured, and because it can be very, if a session's been very noisy, then often you can sometimes see in settings that they use that opportunity to, while we eat quietly, I remember, that's always a big thing. We when we're eating, we eat with our mouth closed and we eat quietly. We just focus on, don't stop messing, just focus on eating. So yes, I understand that obviously, all of that comes as part and parcel of it. But I think that, like you say, that adult-led and that modelling that ability to converse, and that those opportunities for children to learn how to interact in a group situation in a way that they may not do otherwise. If a child prefers that kind of solitary play, and they prefer playing by themselves or just playing alongside others rather than playing necessarily with others, they might not have that much opportunity in the day to see and to learn those skills, not just the speaking and listening, but what we spoke about before, like the grammar and the emphasis that you place on certain words and all of that, to help them to understand what the impact of Oracy is, and what the impact of interactions are, and what the impact of conversation is. And I think that it's a time pressured time, I think, because of when it is in the day. And I was thinking about transitions a few months ago, and the way that we manage transitions in a day, and the fact that actually how many we have, and do we have too many? Do we not have enough? Do we like you said, do we put an emphasis on them, or were they seen as a hindrance to what we're doing? Is lunchtime actually embraced for what it can be, which is a really important social event, or is it actually just a time, right, we've just got to get through this, and then it's time for them to go to sleep afterwards? And I think if we as educators can help to understand the impact and the purpose of what we're doing, and the fact that actually we don't know how much time families have at home, and whether or not, some families might not have a table at home, for example. They may not have a dining table. They may not have the ability to sit and spend that time in a group situation to share their thoughts and feelings and to share their experiences. Children often will like sharing their experiences with each other. I think about how many children come in over the years with something they've done at the weekend, and they're desperate, absolutely desperate to share it with their friends, but their friends are too busy. The friends are engaged playing somewhere else. So that's the perfect opportunity for you as an adult to be like, right, so well, you've got this news to share. Do you want to share that while the friends are there, and that interaction that comes with that, and that feel good, that ability to help a child's well-being and for them to feel important and to feel that sense of self, and that ability, that chance for them to feel valued by their peers, it's a really, really important opportunity to do that. And I think for me, it's about reflecting on what your day looks like, what your daily routine is. How does that work, and what do you put emphasis on, what are you putting importance on? And that's why I came to stories, because I think that's just a real sort of maybe bugbear of mine, for want of a better phrase. I think that actually we don't use them as an important part. We often just use them as right, we'll have a story now before you go home, and it's just right, we've got 10 minutes before they go home, so what can we fill that time with? The same with songs and rhymes, like songs, nursery rhymes. They're so important to help support children's oracy. They're so important to help children's ability to read. We know that children with higher levels of oracy, communication, language are much more likely to be successful readers. They're much more likely to be successful writers. Research shows that is the basis, and the impact outside of early years is how good they are at writing, how good they are at reading, and the impact that has on their future life. And all of these moments might be small in and of themselves, but when you piece them all together, they play such a huge role in how many words children hear a day. I think we were talking about the language gap earlier, and how many words children hear a day. And some children, it's like 50 words a day, some it's 2,000. That difference as an early years educator and as a setting, we can be that difference. We can ensure that child who might only hear 50 words at home for any multitude of reasons is actually getting close to that 2,000 mark, because they are having high quality interactions in the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important, those micro moments throughout the nursery day. And what you were saying about story times and meal times is quite interesting. Kind of reflecting on how children are often seen as out of sync during those time periods, and then labelled as kind of naughty for whatever reason when they don't conform to the adult routine that is set in place for them. So that's fascinating, and an aside to the conversation, unfortunately. We're also coming to the end now, so I just want to press you on 2 or 3 things that practitioners, having listened to this podcast, can go away and do tomorrow that they might not already be doing in their practice.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think one thing for me would actually just to make sure that you have some kind of toolkit, you have some kind of framework, whatever that is. Whether it's whether it's a something like you've got the welcome toolkit, or whether you go on, I know Speech and Language UK have got some great stuff on there that helps you to understand what typical speech and language development looks like. The first thing is to make sure that everybody within your team is confident in being able to identify when children might need that extra intervention, that extra support, and what that might look like. And there's loads of the welcome toolkit, for example, you have to purchase, but a lot of local authorities will help to fund that. But there's lots of free guides out there, as well, that will help support with that, and will help you as an educator to identify those opportunities and to provide you with ideas as to how you can best do that. Not broad ideas as to how you can support speech and language as a whole, but how you can support particular areas, whether it's questioning, whether it's listening, whether it's the understanding of sounds, whether it's that. I think one great thing is, more nursery rhymes, more songs, more stories. Helping children to identify sounds, I think, is really important and potentially unappreciated. For the children to be able to read and be able to learn phonetically as they get to that stage, they need to be able to decipher sounds. They need to be able to understand what sounds sound like and be able to name them and be able to link them. So even even just playing games where you're sat down and you're playing a game with the children to help them identify different sounds. You play musical instruments. What musical instrument is that? You can't see it. It's hidden under a blanket or piece of material, but you're asking them to identify it from the sound. That is just so important. Then you've also got things like memory games, like they can have such a significant role to play there. And when you're thinking about what vocabulary you're doing, the other thing I would do, which I think is really important, and we touched on it earlier on, is any kind of interaction that you're trying to have, any kind of invitation, provocation, enhancement, whatever you're adding. If you've ever added anything new to your space, is to make sure that there's vocabulary that comes with it. So just some sentence starts with some key terminology or some key examples of how you can extend that child's learning by introducing words and terms that they may not have heard before. Because if you've got that as an educator, then you can support that with the children. You can pass that on to families, and they can extend that learning at home. Ultimately, the child's first teacher is their family. We know the understanding, the importance of a home learning environment. So how we can best engage parents and do that is really important. And I think the last one for me would be actually thinking about how many opportunities we provide parents with, and whether we recognise that not everybody has the opportunity to read lots at home. Not everyone has the ability to purchase lots of books. Think about the cost of living crisis that we've seen in recent years. The cost of turning your heating on, is extortionate. So not everyone has that has the ability and has the means to go out and purchase books for children to read. So making sure that you have got that you can do that, and how can you best support that? And some of the great ways I've seen is you've got the story sets, you've got the home lending bags, but actually settings having libraries, setting up spaces where parents, educators, people in the local community can donate books, and then anybody can come and take them. Whether that's families taking them, whether that's children taking them, they can pick them, they can take them for completely free, but just providing that opportunity for children who might not necessarily be able to access that at home for any reason, but to be able to have more language, and for parents to feel, that they are being supported, and to feel inspired, and to feel motivated to do that. Reading to children. Again, I talk about pieces of advice. I've thought of, I'm off on another one, but a piece of advice I always got for any child who got, any kind of 2-year funding EYPP was make sure you read to them a few times a day. It's really easy. It's really effective. It's not, it doesn't take too much time out of your day, but it's something, if you're reading to that child on a one-to-one basis, you are immediately helping to close that word gap. You're helping to inspire them. You're helping to provide them with that ability and the knowledge and that they need to help them write their own stories, to help them to read, and that as they progress moving forward.
Thanks so much, Adam. Slightly more than 2 or 3 tips there, but
sorry, I've just started going.
Incredibly useful nonetheless, and you've given us a real insight into a range of different strategies that practitioners can embed within their settings to support Oracy. So a brilliant way to end this podcast. Thanks so much, Adam.
Thank you very much, Shaddai.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to our guest Adam for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Educators podcast with me, Dr. Shaddai Tembo, and Adam Marycz. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your setting and links to relevant resources.